Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are super excited to have Natalie with us. Natalie's a biological oceanographer at the UC San Diego Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and I'll let her describe more kind of her background and what she's done. But yeah, we're super excited. Thank you all for joining. And just a reminder that this is being recorded, so make sure you have parent permission to keep your video on. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to type them in the chat or raise your hand and Akriti and I will call on you. So Natalie, whenever you're ready.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and just to kind of build off of that, I might ask you all some questions. So if you want to type them in the chat or unmute yourself when they tell you it's okay, please do so, because I love to interact with you as I talk about what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to share my screen and my sound. Okay. So as Ryan said, my name is Natalie Posdaljian, and I am a biological oceanographer. So I am doing a PhD. I'm in the 4th year of the program. So what a PhD is when it's kind of like college, but you're adding on to what you've learned in college. So you go all the way up to 12th grade, you graduate high school, then you go do your 4-year college degree. So you're kind of at like 16th grade at that point. And then you go on to do a PhD where you focus on one topic that you really, really love and you really want to learn about. And for me, that was the ocean. And you spend another 5 to 7 years studying that topic. So technically, I'm kind of in 20th grade right now, which is pretty high up there. And I guess I just really love school and I really love learning because I'm still doing it. I go to the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is part of UC San Diego. So I'm in California, down in San Diego. This is a picture of my school. And actually today it's been 366 days since I've been able to go on campus because of COVID. So I've been working from home, but usually my office is this one right here with the orange building. So I get a really nice view of the ocean. Pretty cool place to be a biological oceanographer. And we'll kind of talk about what that means because it's a pretty big word, and maybe you hear the word biology and ocean in there, but we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So I'll tell you how I got to where I am into this PhD program. So growing up around when I was your age, I loved science. I wasn't very good at it necessarily, but I really, really loved it. I loved discovering new things and doing experiments. And right before this even, we were talking about baking chocolate chip cookies, and that's science. I mean, baking is science, getting your measurements correct and creating this kind of concoction that you stick in the oven and a chemical reaction happens and then you have a chocolate chip cookie. So I really loved that part of science growing up. And so when I graduated high school, I went to the University of California, San Diego, and this is a really cool picture of our library that kind of looks like a spaceship. And then while I was at UCSD, I got to study abroad in Australia. So when you study abroad, you kind of leave your home university, you go to a different country or a different state sometimes, and you do a semester there and you study there with the students at that university. So I got to go up to Australia where the Great Barrier Reef is. And we're also talking about Finding Dory, which takes place in Australia as well. And so I was able to spend tons of time on coral reefs, snorkeling, and collecting data. I also worked in kind of the deserts of Australia. So we took measurements of different animals that were kind of endangered in that area to learn more about them. And that's when I realized I need to do research. I love it so much. I just constantly want to be asking questions and finding those answers to those questions. So right after I graduated, I decided to go to Alaska and work there for 2 years. So I worked on fishing boats where fishermen go out and they catch huge amounts of fish to help feed us. So does anyone here like fish? Like salmon or shrimp? You can either raise your hand or write in the chat if you like fish. Yeah, do you like fish? So there's a good chance that some of the fish you like actually come from Alaska. That's where a lot of the fish in the US comes from. So I was on these boats collecting data about what the fishermen were catching to make sure that fish are going to be in our oceans for generations to come, so that your kids and your grandkids are going to be able to eat from the fish in the ocean. And so this data that I was collecting was kind of going towards making sure that there was going to be enough fish in the ocean. And while I was working with fish, I saw a lot of whales. So a lot of tales like this. As I was on the boat, a whale would be kind of close to us, maybe getting curious about what this boat was doing here. And then we'd see these beautiful tails as they dove down to, eat down from fish. And I just loved seeing these whales. It made me so happy. And so I thought, you know what, I need to study whales and I want to go back to school to do that. So that's when I returned back to UCSD to do my PhD. And these are just a few pictures of me doing some research out on the boats that we go out with at Scripps. Okay, so I said I was a biological oceanographer, but what do you think a biological oceanographer does? Or even when I tell people that I'm a biological oceanographer, I get some puzzled looks. Sometimes they think that and I tell them I work with whales, right? So sometimes they think that I work at SeaWorld and I play with the dolphins. And I have to say, no, that's not exactly what I do. And then they say, oh, do you work in a lab with chemicals and a microscope? So sometimes my family thinks when I say I do research, that's what they envision, wearing a white coat in a lab doing research like this. And I was like, no, not quite. And then my friends see where my office is and they think, oh, you just sit on the beach all day and just hang out at the beach, right? And I was like, the beach is close by, but no, I don't spend time sitting on the beach all day. And then, of course, some of my professors think that we're just out there goofing around with our friends on the boats and just having a good time, which sometimes, of course, we do. But what I like to think I do is form some sort of connection with the animals in the ocean, particularly whales, and try to do research that's going to protect them in the future from different human caused impacts and threats that they're dealing with. But what I actually do is I spend a lot of time in front of my two screens. And so I do a lot of work on the computer. And honestly, when I first started in this field, I didn't realize how much time I was going to spend on the computer, programming, working with different software and technology. And I really, really enjoy it. But it's not exactly what you think of when you think of a biological oceanographer. So what is biological oceanography? So biological oceanography is the study of life in the ocean. This could be anything from the tiny phytoplankton and krill that are at the bottom of the food chain, all the way up to the top of the food chain, say this gray whale here that I have pictured. So we're studying the life in the ocean, where the life is, why is it there, how many of them are there? And so these are the types of questions we're asking. But we're not just concerned with the life in the ocean, we're also interested about the physical properties of the ocean. So if you've seen Finding Nemo, and I said there would be a Finding Nemo reference, then you remember that Crush and Squirt and Dory and Nemo's dad had to ride the East Australian Current. So that was the EAC. That current is a physical property in the ocean that helps organisms move around. It actually moves organisms. In this case, it was moving turtles, right? The turtles were using this current that moves a little bit faster than the rest of the ocean to help them get from point A to point B just a little bit faster than they normally would. So not only are we studying the life, but we're studying the physics around this life that shapes what life in the ocean is like. And on top of that, we're also studying the chemical properties. So what is the chemistry of the ocean? You might have learned about climate change in your classes, and you might have heard the word CO2 or carbon dioxide. And so that's what's being emitted from factories and cars and causing the chemical composition of the ocean to change. And so studying this is important for what's pictured here are coral reefs and fish, but it's also important for really big animals like this gray whale here that relies on you know, crustaceans that are going to form their shell and have to make sure that there's a good chemical balance in the ocean for them to form their shells. Otherwise, the gray whale wouldn't have food. So that's kind of what a biological oceanographer does and what biological oceanography is. And there's so many different ways to study this topic. You can be doing lab work in kind of that picture that I showed you with the white coat scientists working with vials and microscopes. You can go out onto the ocean and collect samples of water and kind of see what's inside of them. But how I study biological oceanography is by eavesdropping or listening to marine mammals in the ocean. So the ocean is a really, really noisy place. So next time you go to the ocean, what I suggest you do is when you're kind of swimming around, just kind of dunk your head underwater, close your eyes and just take like 10 seconds and try to listen to the different sounds that you hear. I can guarantee that you're going to hear at least some bubbles. Maybe if you're down in Florida, you'll hear some snapping shrimp. Shrimp make noise. Maybe if there's a boat driving by, you'll hear a boat making noise. Animals make sounds, marine mammals make sounds. Fish also make sounds. So there's tons of things we can study. We can study their communication between the two. We could study their growth or mating behaviors. And we could study predator and prey interactions. So we could actually hear a killer whale, for example, predating on a seal or something. That's a sound we can hear based off of the sound that the different animals are making. And so I just want to play a few sound clips for you. So I study, and just as a disclaimer, I can't guarantee how loud the sounds might be. So just be ready if they're a little bit too loud to lower your volume. So I study the sperm whale. That's the animal that my specific research is about. And here is a little GIF showing you a group of sperm whales. So sperm whales are really cool because they're found everywhere in the ocean. And they're kind of like the canary in the coal mine, where if something is wrong with the sperm whale, then we know that something is wrong with the ocean in that area. They make a lot of sounds. They're always vocalizing because they eat a lot. And when they eat, they do what's called echolocation, similar to a bat. So they send a sound out, it's a click into the ocean, and then they wait for that sound to come back to them and they get an idea of how far their food is. And so this is what a sperm whale click sounds like. So I've heard it sounds like a metronome, it sounds like a ticking clock, sounds like a timer. So these are their echolocation clicks, and they're constantly eating and constantly making this sound. It makes it really easy to study them because they're just always making noise. So when we put our underwater microphones in the water and collect our data, there's always sperm whale sounds in there. So I'm lucky in that way. Other sounds we can hear, maybe you've heard of a narwhal or the unicorn of the sea. So this is what narwhals sound like. So a lot of different sounds happening there. Yeah, I know, that's super cool, right? So narwhals they also echolocate. So you heard the little like clicking sound. It kind of sounded like you were popping those the packaging material that comes in boxes sometimes. Then you heard what kind of sounds like a kazoo maybe. That's their communication with one another. You heard some whistling. So it's just a symphony of sounds when the narwhals are around. And so there's all these biological sounds that we record, but we can also record human-made sounds. So this is what's called a seal cracker device. And sometimes fishermen will use these to scare away seals that are trying to get in the way of their fishing. So these sound like this. So the sound is coming up right now. So it kind of sounds like a little explosion. And so we can record these types of sounds and get an idea of what was happening during that time when we were recording in that moment. And then lastly, we are as a society, rely on shipping to get our goods from one place to another. So if you've ever ordered anything online that's coming from abroad, it's probably come on a container ship like this. And these boats or ships are really loud. So I'm going to make sure this one is not that loud. So that sound you're hearing is their engine running. So in any single day, and depending on what part of the ocean you're in, you can hear all of these sounds and much, much more. And so our instruments go in the water for anywhere from a few months to a whole year. So we come back to the same place, and we pick up our underwater microphone and we take it back into the lab. And you can imagine 365 days of acoustic recordings is a lot to listen to. So we can't sit there, unfortunately, with headphones and just listen to the different sounds we hear. So you might have heard the term big data. And so our industry of acoustic biological oceanography produces really big data, and we need efficient ways to be able to find patterns in this data without just listening to the sounds we're hearing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like by showing you what a day in the life of a biological oceanographer might be. So normally, this is pre-COVID times, I would wake up and head to the office, and most days are not, don't involve being on a boat like you might think, but sometimes they do. So it makes those office days really worth it. And obviously the days spent in front of my computer are important because we can collect all that data, but then we need to bring that data back to the lab or back to our office and actually find information in that data and then do some science with it. And so what does that doing science look like? So a lot of our time is spent writing software that will analyze ocean data. And coding is a really powerful tool, as you all know, I'm sure. And we use it every day to identify patterns in the ocean that help us make new discoveries. And so here on the right is a figure. This is called a spectrogram. And so this is how we visualize sound. So instead of listening to it, we can visualize it on our computers. So here's time on the x-axis. So this is going to be, when I play it for you, it's going to be a 30-second sound clip. And this is frequency on the y-axis. So frequency is the pitch of the sound. So you could have a really low frequency sound like this, and you can have a really high frequency sound like this. And so this is showing us frequency. So these sounds are low frequency, and these sounds are high frequency. And the colors on the plot represent how loud the sound is. So anywhere you see the color red, orange, yellow, that sound is going to be really loud. And anywhere you see kind of the lighter blues, it's going to be really quiet. And so what our software does is it looks through the data and it tries to find patterns. So maybe finding humpback whale song patterns. And when I play this song, it's going to sound like really familiar to how Dory imitated speaking whale in Finding Nemo. And so humpback whales actually sound like that. So let's take a listen to what that sounds like. So here's that sound. See how much lower that one was? It was really low frequency. Now we're here. Now we're here. We're about to get higher frequency here. And one last low frequency. So humpback whales they're extremely vocal, and humpback whale songs are produced by the male humpback whales to attract a female. So they're trying to show the females, look how low I can sing, look how loud I can sing, look how long I can sing, and try to impress them. So that's the reason why we study humpback whale song is to learn about these mating interactions between males and females. And lastly, kind of the last step of that process is taking what we find and visualizing it. So data visualization is a really powerful tool. You can have as many scripts and software as you want that's going to analyze the data, but if you don't take what you learned and then show people what you learned, it's not going to really go anywhere. So as a researcher, my goal is always to create plots and figures and graphics that I can show other researchers. I can show conservationists or people who are trying to protect the ocean. I can show policymakers or people who are making the laws around protecting the oceans. And this is really important to communicate my research. So this is actually not a plot I made, but it's a plot my colleague made. And what he's interested in learning about is how deep whales can dive and what depth they spend most of their time. And so how he's doing that is by recording echolocation clicks from whales in this canyon. So here's a canyon and we're zooming in on it. These are our underwater microphones. They're about a mile deep in the ocean. And what he's doing is tracking the whales' use of the ocean in this red line here. So the whale is now swimming a little bit up and back down, and the whale's gonna go all the way back up. This is a mile deep. So it's really, really cool that we can actually see what the animals are doing and then watch it take a really deep dive right about now. So maybe it found some better food a little bit deeper. So it dove down a little bit deeper to find that food. And we can track these animals, and then we can learn what part of the water column. So are they using the surface of the ocean or the deep ocean more? In this case, they were using the deep ocean because that was about a mile down. And then we can tell policymakers and conservationists, it's really important to protect the deep ocean because look how much these animals are using it to dive up and down looking for food. Okay, and sometimes we do get to go out on boats, and those are really, really fun days. This is a picture of our instrument that we put in the ocean, this yellow thing here. And this is in this yellow plastic container is where we keep our computers that store the data that we collect. So I'm gonna play this video. We don't need the sound. And so what we do is we go out on a boat, we take a crane, and we gently, slowly drop our instrument in the water. The instrument has these weights at the bottom that then allow it to sink all the way a mile down to the bottom of the ocean. A year later, we come back, we send our instrument a little code. So we have a GPS, so we know kind of where it is. We send it a little code. That instrument releases its weights, and these orange buoys, or the red buoys that you see here, the red circles, help it float all the way back to the surface. It takes about 30 minutes to float all the way that mile back up. We use our binoculars to kind of look around, and then we say, oh, there it is. And then we drive the boat over and we pick up the instrument and bring it down back onto the boat and back into the lab. And sometimes if we get really lucky when we're out there, we actually get to see the animals that we're trying to study. And here is one example when a really curious whale came really close to our boat. There was two of them. So you hear someone say, you stink, but I love you. And that's because when they blow out of their blowhole, it's kind of like stinky because it smells like what they just ate, which is like little shrimp, little krill. So it smells pretty bad, but he's like, you stink, but I love you, which is pretty accurate when it comes to whales. So that's kind of how a day in the life would look like, and like going out on the boats as well. And so just kind of like real quick, I want to explain to you how we would use that data then to ask science questions. So we have two boxes here. One is showing us the acoustic scene. And the acoustic scene is kind of like, think about a landscape, like you took a picture of like a beautiful landscape, but this is the soundscape. So all the different sounds that you're hearing and not necessarily seeing. And then we want to find out what individual sound events are in that soundscape. So for example, if you took a picture of a landscape, maybe you'll say, oh, there's a mountain, there's a tree, there's a cow, there's some grass. And so we kind of want to do the same thing, but with our soundscape. So for example, we might record a cargo ship. So in a soundscape, there might be a cargo ship, there might be a pod of dolphins, and maybe there's a blue whale. And just because blue whales are so cool, here's what they sound like. So this is our acoustic scene, and we want to then use some sort of recognition software. And so that's where the coding comes in to say there was a cargo ship, there was a pod of common dolphins, and there was a blue whale. And so we want to take that beautiful soundscape and break it down into individual sound events. So there's a few ways we can do that. One is pattern recognition. And so we might build a software that can take a pattern that you give it. So we might say, this pattern here is one part of a humpback whale song. And then we'll take the pattern and we'll teach an algorithm to recognize that pattern. And then we'll give it some data that we're then trained. So we trained it on this pattern, and now we're going to test it on some data. So we might give it this data that you've already seen before we listened to this humpback whale song. And now it should be able to recognize every time it sees this pattern in the data itself. So it's kind of similar to how like facial recognition software works. If any of you have an iPhone and or your parents have an iPhone and you have the option to just like hold your face in front of the iPhone and it unlocks it for you. So your iPhone has software in it that's recognizing what your face looks like, and then it knows when to unlock the phone and when not to unlock the phone. And so this is kind of a similar concept where it's taking what it recognizes, which is this pattern here, and it's saying, oh, we found this pattern here and we found something similar here. And so this must be a humpback whale song. Another way we can do it is called clustering. So here are a bunch of different patterns. So these are shapes, they're different colors, different shapes. And this is kind of what a soundscape might be like. You have all these sounds. Some of them might sound similar. So this square kind of looks similar to this. It looks exactly the same as this square, but they're a slightly different color. So that's kind of how our soundscape looks like too. We might have two different dolphins. They're both dolphins, but one dolphin sounds a little bit different than another dolphin, another species of dolphin. So what clustering does is it's a machine learning technique where you give it all this data and it tries to find similarities. So after you run it through a clustering algorithm, it would tell you, okay, these looked really similar, these looked really similar, and these looked really similar. So these three are definitely distinct from one another, and so it would cluster them in the same group. So maybe this was the blue whale, this was the ship sound, and this was the dolphin sound. But then there's these other sounds that kind of look similar, but not exactly. But the clustering is still able to tell us that these look similar, but they're not exactly the same. And same with these, they look similar, but they're not exactly the same. So it's kind of telling us we were able to recognize two different kinds of ships, but they're not making the same sound. So they might be a little bit different. And same here, two different dolphins, and they're two different species that make two different sounds. Okay, so what are we going to do with all of this information? So we have all these different software and algorithms that we run on this data, and it tells us what's there, but so what? So what are we going to do with that now? So this is just a little snippet of my research. So in the Arctic, which you can see here, the Arctic is changing really, really fast because of climate change. So this white area that is kind of disappearing over time is sea ice. And sea ice is melting at faster rates every single year. And a lot of animals rely on this ice for habitat. So seals will hang out on the ice, they'll have their babies on the ice, they'll rest on the ice. Other animals need ice because their food is found in the ice. So there are whales in Alaska that feed on little shrimp that are found in the ice. And so the ice is really important for their food. One animal that does not like ice is sperm whales. They don't go anywhere where there is ice. And the reason why is because they are not strong enough to break through the ice to come up for a breath. So marine mammals are mammals, right? And we breathe air, and just like we breathe air, marine mammals, they also need to breathe air. That's why they come up from their dive, they take a breath, they go back down. And so sperm whales are not strong enough to break through the ice and come up for a breath before they go down. So there's other animals that can do that. And so what's happening is the Arctic is melting, and what we're noticing is because there's less sea ice, now it seems like sperm whales are taking advantage of that. And so they are starting to go up farther and farther north, farther towards the North Pole than they've ever been found. And so here is kind of the site that we've been doing the study, and this GIF is blocking a little part of the map, but this area is called Baffin Island, and there's an indigenous community of Canadian people that live here, and they have never seen sperm whales before. They've seen other types of marine mammals, but there was this one year where they noticed a new animal that they've never seen in their oceans. And so scientists and the indigenous people that live there were very curious as to why sperm whales are starting to show up here. And so then comes my research. And so what I did is I ran that algorithm. I'm going to go back. So I ran that algorithm and found all the sperm whale clicks in the data that we have here. So we have an underwater microphone that has been recording here for 4 years, but not interested in sperm whales. It was interested in belugas and narwhals. And now what we decided was, let's go back and let's see if we can find sperm whales in that data. And maybe we can show that sperm whales are starting to go up to this area that they've never been found before. And so that's what we found. And so here is the date at the bottom. So we started in May 2016 and we ended our recording in July of 2019. And sperm whales are only there. And so this is showing you the weekly amount of sperm whale clicks. So here is minutes, 400 minutes, 200 minutes. So the first year they were only there for 2 weeks for about maybe 50 minutes total. The second year they came back, they stayed for 3 weeks, but still really low numbers. The fourth year they came back, they were now at 200 minutes and staying for 3 years. And then the last year that we were recording, they were there for almost a month, more than a month, and they were vocalizing for over 400 minutes a week. So you can see here that this is increasing over time, and sperm whales are starting to go up and use this area. And so now our questions are, well, what does that mean for the other animals that live in that area and for the ecosystem as a whole? So the ecosystem is changing, but now we're wondering, well, what's going to really change with sperm whales there? So more research questions to answer in the future. I just want to, before we go into questions, I just want to wrap up, and I'll share this presentation maybe in the YouTube slide link, but if you're interested in the ocean, there's tons of resources that I really recommend that you check out. And I just want to make a note that I was interested in the oceans before I was interested in coding and computers, and I just got into that in the last 4 years. So it's really cool to me that you can take this knowledge that you know about technology, about software, programming, coding, and you can apply it to so many different fields, and the oceans being one of them. So I'm really glad I ended up where I am, but it's all still a new learning experience to me. So every day I'm learning something new, and I'm having a really, really good time. So I will take questions, and this is also my email if you ever have questions about what it's like to pursue marine biology or study marine mammals. I'd be happy to answer them.
That was so wonderful. That was really interesting. And I'm really happy that we were able to have you chat with us today.
Yeah.
So girls, this is now your chance to ask any and all questions that you have for Natalie. Yeah, go ahead.
Are there other animals invading other areas?
That's a really good question. And yes, so sperm whales are kind of the best animal to invade because they're gentle giants. They don't eat other marine mammals. They do eat squid, so that's their food preference. But there are other animals that can cause more damage. One of them is the one that I had on my last slide, which was the killer whale. And they do eat marine mammals. And so what is happening is killer whales, like sperm whales, are starting to go into these areas where there's no ice. and they're starting to prey on narwhals. So the unicorns of the sea, the ones that have the horns, that's actually a tooth, but it kind of sticks out from their head. So the narwhals have never experienced killer whales before. And so it's very obvious that they're not sure how to deal with their new predator that is starting to go into the Arctic more and more. And so researchers are interested in finding out, are the narwhals going to be able to adapt to this new predator that's in their area? Are they going to move to a different area? So interesting to see how that will change. But yeah, that's one of the other examples.
Something I always love to ask our speakers is what they wanted to be when they were younger. So did you have any idea that you'd be pursuing a career like this?
No, I had no idea. Growing up, I always thought I wanted to be a pediatrician, and that's kind of what I think a lot of kids have that idea. And my mom was really, really upset when I decided not to pursue medical school. But now I told her, hey, in 2 years, I'm going to be a doctor when I finish my PhD, just not a doctor of medicine. I'm going to be a doctor of marine mammal acoustics. So yeah, I think for me, I realized that I just love the ocean, and I wanted to dedicate my life's work to helping the ocean any way that I can. And so that's why I chose this path.
Yeah, that's so neat. I didn't realize that there was any overlap between coding and oceanography. Theta has a question. Do all biological oceanographers study the animals in the ocean?
That's a really good question, Theta. Yeah, all biological oceanographers do, but not all oceanographers do. So when you add the biological in front of it, you're saying that you're studying the biology or the life that's in the ocean relative to what's happening in the ocean, versus just an oceanographer. A physical oceanographer would just study the physics of the ocean, so the currents, the waves, and then maybe a chemical oceanographer would study the chemistry of the ocean. So like how climate change is affecting the ocean, or how plastics are affecting the chemistry of the ocean. So the biological definitely means that they're studying some sort of animal, but of course there's all different kinds of animals in the ocean. So plankton are the really, really tiny kind of like trees of the ocean that photosynthesize. And there's people that study those all the way up from birds and turtles and fish, all the way to marine mammals.
Oh, birds. Are there specific birds that fly like over the oceans or that are relevant to the oceans? I didn't realize that. Or you just mean birds?
No, I mean seabirds.
That's cool.
Yeah, so one of the seabirds that is really popular here is the osprey. It's a bird of prey. If like there's a brand, I think it's like a backpacking brand called the Osprey, but there's actually on this pier here that is behind me, at the very edge of the pier, there is a bird. Her name is Oswald. She's an osprey. She has been at Scripps for like 30 years and is the queen of the pier. And so there is one researcher who studies ospreys, and so studies Oswald, and actually she got her name before they knew Oswald was a she, and so her name stuck as Oswald. But yeah, so seabirds, there are some seabirds that spend like 90% of their lives on the ocean.
Sweet, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So when you conduct your research, is there a difference between like whales or other animals in one ocean versus a different ocean, like different parts of the world?
Yeah, there are some differences. Acoustically speaking, there are some differences, definitely. So killer whales, for example, they are not the same everywhere. There's like subspecies of killer whales that they eat different things, they sound differently, they make different kinds of sounds. And so sound is a really good way to tell the different subspecies apart. Sperm whales, for example, they sound the same everywhere. So they just have that echolocation click, but there are still differences about their behaviors depending on what oceans they're found in. So for example, just because I know a lot about Alaska and sperm whales, in Alaska, sperm whales have taught themselves how to feed off of fishing line. So they'll go up to a boat that's fishing, and they'll, as the fishermen are pulling their line with their hooks in, the sperm whale will eat the fish off of the line. But that's not been witnessed anywhere else in any other ocean. So they've somehow they've like developed this other little behavior where they can, it's basically free lunch for them, where they just, you know, and the fishermen hate it, but I was like always so excited when I could see a sperm whale nearby.
We have another great question from Theta. What is your favorite animal to listen to?
I think the narwhal, well, I don't know, it's really hard. I love listening to humpback whale song. I don't know if any of you have like listened to white noise when you're falling asleep, but I love listening to whale sounds when I sleep, and that's always like usually a humpback whale song is like very relaxing. So kind of that typical the way in Finding Nemo that Dory imitates a whale, that's kind of like a humpback whale. But then I also love narwhals, and that's why I just had to have you listen to them. I mean, they just make the coolest sounds. Yeah, those are probably my two favorite.
I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but Elena asked, what endangered species have you seen or met?
That's a really good question. And I'm gonna say majority of marine mammals that I've seen are endangered. So 90% of marine mammals are endangered, and this is partially because of historical whaling. So back before electricity existed, we used to use whale oil or whale blubber to burn candles and have light and electricity and to cook with. And so they were very, very the stocks, the marine mammal stocks were depleted to really low numbers. We just took too many whales and there were so few of them left. And now they've started to recover since that. So the numbers are going back up. But then of course now they're dealing with new threats like climate change and shipping strikes. So boats or ships hitting marine mammals, plastic, a lot of animals washing up with plastic in their stomachs. And so most whales are endangered. So sperm whales, for example, are endangered, and I've seen plenty of those. Off of the coast of San Diego here, there are gray whales that migrate up and down the coast every year. And so gray whales are an example of a marine mammal that is actually not endangered. They have recovered back to pre-whaling numbers. And so gray whales are the one that I've met that is not endangered, and then sperm whales are endangered, and really most other marine mammals. I see Theta typing away with a question.
What are some things that people can do to help endangered marine animals?
That's a really good question, Theta. And I think it's a really good question because people think that they have to live right on the ocean to do something, right? So my lifestyle on the ocean affects the whales, of course, but really everyone's lifestyle. So even if you don't live by an ocean, what we do every day affects the marine mammals. So one of the biggest things is just trying to reduce our carbon footprint. Has anyone heard of the term carbon footprint before? No, kind of. So carbon is, we talked about carbon dioxide a little bit, right? So carbon dioxide is what's being, what comes out of your car, what comes out of factories. And so this carbon dioxide is going into our atmosphere, and it's making our world warmer. It's making our oceans warmer. So the ocean absorbs that carbon dioxide and it throws off the chemical like the chemical balance in the ocean. And so one of the best things we can do for whales is try to figure out how to reduce our carbon footprint. So our footprint, if you think when you like step into the sand, you make a footprint, right? We're leaving some sort of footprint on the earth based on how much carbon dioxide we're emitting. So if you are driving, you know, every single day for 6 hours a day, your carbon footprint is going to be bigger than, for example, someone else who's riding their bike instead or something like that. So figuring out how to take our carbon footprint and make it as small as we can by using alternative forms of transportation like biking or walking when we can instead of driving, reducing the amount of plastic we use. Of course, that's a big one. It's not just for the marine mammals, but in general, reducing the amount of plastic we use. And so we can all make these individual lifestyle changes, and hopefully it'll cause a little bit of change, but the biggest change is going to happen on a much broader level, which is government putting in policies and laws that are going to prevent these companies and factories from continuing to pollute the world the way they do. So for me, and I know you all are still maybe 6 years out from being able to vote, but for me, the biggest thing and is voting for people who are going to then take those laws and put them into action. So any lawmaker or policymaker or politician who has climate change as a top priority is going to get my vote. And so that's kind of the two ways. On a large scale, you can vote or have your parents vote. And then on a smaller scale, you can make small changes like reducing plastic use and using alternative energy.
I love that. I think it's so important to just highlight how we individually can make changes in our daily lives to help animals in the ocean. Question from Darian: how did you get into this field?
Oh, I don't even know. I feel like I just sometimes I just like, I wake up and I'm like, how did I get here? So I was studying science to go into medical school as a college student. I thought that's what I wanted to do. And then it was like my second year of college, I think, I took an elective class called marine conservation, and I thought, this will be an easy A that I could just kind of take and you know, focus on my other classes. And that class just like changed my world. I realized so many of the things we were doing on a day-to-day basis were just completely ruining our oceans. And for me, the ocean has always held such an important place, and I really want to make sure that future generations can enjoy the ocean, the animals that live in it, the resources the ocean provides for us, like fish. And so I decided that I needed to forget medical school and go into oceanography. So that's kind of how I got into that field, into this field.
So are there a lot of women in your field? And if not, how do you work with all of the different people that work in your field, and what does that look like?
Yeah, that's I'm really lucky in the sense that marine mammals tend to attract more women than men. And so in my lab, I do my PhD within a lab group. And so our lab group has kind of one person who leads it, and she is an amazing leader of our lab. And actually my lab is all women. And so I got really lucky because I just am surrounded by all these positive influences and inspiration. But I know that that's not always the case in the tech world. And so I'm aware that there are obstacles that, you know, women in tech have to face, but I feel really, really lucky and privileged to have that kind of positive women mentorship by my colleagues. Theta wants to share a quick story. You want to go ahead and share it?
So, at my school, there are these group of boys that are obsessed with turtles for whatever reason. So one day at recess, they brought a whole bunch of gloves and bags, and they started picking up all the litter at our playground. And they actually got to go to a school meeting for our parents and teachers to present their idea for getting outside trash cans to help prevent litter. And they actually did a ton of studying about marine animals and how the plastic is affecting them, and presented it to our principal. And they thought that we might actually be able to get an outdoor trash can.
Cool. That is such a great example of how you can make a change in your own community. So good for them. That's awesome.
It's really cool.
Theta, where do you go to school? Do you live near the ocean?
No, I live in Lincoln.
Okay, that's what I figured. But I mean, it's so great that they have such a connection to turtles in the ocean, even though they're not really very close to one. But it's totally true that it doesn't matter where you live, that trash could still end up in the ocean. So all the water bodies that are on land, so all the rivers and lakes, they end up in the ocean one way or another. And so if anything ends up in the body of water, like in a river, it might end up in the ocean. So yeah, really important to make sure it at least ends up in the trash, or just try to eliminate the amount of trash you produce from in the first place.
Sweet. So if any more of our girls have questions, feel free to send them in. We usually like to wrap this up with some sort of advice for our students. So anything you have related to pursuing your dreams, or just something that's been relevant to your story, if you have any parting advice for our girls.
Yeah, I think the advice that I would give you all is just don't take no for an answer. And if someone tells you, no, I don't think that's a good idea, or I don't think you should follow that path. And I received a lot of pushback from my family about pursuing marine sciences, because people think that there are no jobs in this field, that I wasn't going to end up being as successful as a doctor would be. And so I really pushed back, and I was, stubborn in my decision to pursue this field. But I think that has paid back, because now I'm doing what I love, and I get to show people that, you know what, it's possible to find a job doing what you want to do without having to, follow a path you're not interested in. I wasn't interested in medical school, and I'm really glad that I decided to not listen to them and not take no for an answer and pursue what I wanted to do.
That's great advice. I love that. All right. As long as none of our girls have any other questions, I think we'll probably wrap it up. Natalie, thank you so much for giving us this time to chat about your career and everything related to oceanography and coding. It's been super interesting, especially for me. I just didn't know that there was any overlap between the two. So I'm sure our girls were also excited to hear about that. So thank you for taking the time. And thank you to all of our girls who came and came to our speaking event. We'll have another one next Sunday. Emma, do you have a question? Or Audrey, sorry if I mixed you two up.
I think she was saying bye.
You're just saying goodbye? Okay. Wonderful. Well, have a great rest of your Sunday, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.